This was a master class in anti-diplomacy. Donald Trump really believes, and I've known the man for more than 37 years. I spent hundreds of hours with him. He really believes that he is unique and special, and he should be the dictator of the whole world, because everybody else, we're all idiots, unless, of course, we say, "Oh, Mr. President, you are the greatest president of all time. You're the greatest genius ever in office." In that case, he likes us until something happens that he doesn't.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today I've got David Cay Johnston on the show. He's a professor at Rochester Institute of Technology and, of course, an author of an array of books on Donald Trump. So, Professor, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report.
Glad to be with you again, Maddie.
Let's start off with, we're going to get into the main takeaways from yesterday's UN General Assembly, but let's start off with just a few comments from President Zelensky. He's just done his UN address. I want to read out a few of the quotes that he said. He said, "The facts are simple. Stopping this war now and within the global arms race is cheaper than building underground kindergartens or massive bunkers for critical infrastructure later. Stopping Putin now is cheaper than trying to protect every port and every ship from terrorists with sea drones. Stopping Russia now is cheaper than wondering who will be the tourist to create a simple drone carrying a nuclear warhead." So, Professor, just your reaction to that speech from President Zelensky.
Well, President Zelensky's in a very, very difficult position because he has to, first of all, not annoy Donald Trump, who at the moment appears to be on his side, but that can change in 10 seconds. He has to continue to lean on the European Union and the UK, who have been the biggest providers of support to Ukraine. And he's got to make a case to people in the democracies that he depends on, explain to them the reasons it's important that they address this. And he's exactly right. If Vladimir Putin is not stopped in Ukraine, then Europe is looking at decades of additional conflict. So I think he's trying to make a very rational argument. And let's keep in mind that also that, he was a very successful in Ukraine comedian, both stand-up and scheduled scripted shows. Every successful comedian you see is very, very smart. They don't get those positions without being very smart. And he's displayed throughout the last 3.5 years, his masterful skill of understanding how to maintain support for Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression.
Let's talk about this 52-minute speech from Donald Trump at the UN General Assembly on Tuesday, David. There was a lot that happened. Just for our audience who were not in the know, he really didn't hold back on condemning certain UN countries. He claimed that he had solved 6 wars in 6 months. He condemned those who recognized Palestine as a state. He said that some countries were going to hell over their immigration policies. So just to wrap up that 52-minute speech, Professor, was there any particular part that made your blood boil?
Oh, most of it. I mean, this was a master class in anti-diplomacy. Donald Trump really believes, and I've known the man for more than 37 years. I spent hundreds of hours with him. He really believes that he is unique and special, and he should be the dictator of the whole world, because everybody else, we're all idiots, unless, of course, we say, "Oh, Mr. President, you are the greatest president of all time. You're the greatest genius ever in office." In that case, he likes us until something happens that he doesn't. And this was literally a masterclass in how to alienate people. There's a book that's been on sale in America for something like 80 years by a man named Dale Carnegie called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And Donald's read the opposite of that book.
Professor, one of the other things that came out of this extraordinary event at the UN General Assembly yesterday, and I mind you, it's still going on, just for our audience who don't know it, it's still going on today, but Secret Service are investigating whether Trump was sabotaged at the assembly after the escalator stopped as soon as he and the First Lady got on it, and the fact that, of course, his teleprompter didn't work. Now, Caroline Levitt, she said that UN globalist staffers were basically plotting to set up the President of the United States. So what's your reaction to this?
Well, this is the manipulative part of Donald and the people around him, particularly Caroline Levitt. If you're on an escalator, you're at a shopping mall or an airport, the escalator stops, what do? You just walk on. It's a stairway. But they want to create anything that suggests that dear leader is in danger. And all presidents are in danger. We had our first presidential assassination in 1865. And so this is just typical tactics. Now, I believe we will find that the teleprompter was under the control not of UN people, but people from the Trump administration. And one of the hallmarks of the Trump administration is hiring utterly incompetent people. You appoint a person who operates in the healthcare world on crazy conspiracy theories and spent 14 years of his life injecting heroin into his veins, and you put him as the head of the American government's medical arm. So the way that Carolyn Leavitt has postured this is just directly connected to Donald Trump's view of himself as America's dictator and his stated belief that I have a constitution that says I can do anything I want, which is not what the U.S. Constitution says.
Professor, Donald Trump, he really changed his tune when it came to commitment to Ukraine and the way he's been speaking about Russia. But we can't forget that in February, which was the assembly before last, the United States did vote alongside Russia, which was a monumental moment for the Trump administration's shift away from NATO and their allies, I should say. So this vote meant that they basically didn't condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So Tuesday showed a very different story with Trump's meeting with Zelensky, indicating that there's a complete backing of Ukraine. Do you think that Trump vindicated himself away from what that was, which was a massive slap in the face to Ukraine?
Well, that's a very interesting verb, vindicated. Clearly, Donald completely reversed his position and totally unexpected. I don't think any of us saw this coming. I don't know why we would. And, it may be the new policy that will continue to the extent that Donald even has policies, or, as soon as we finish taping this, he may turn around and say the exact opposite. Trump's problem is that he ran for office saying he was going to do all sorts of magical things. I'll end the war in the Ukraine in one day. I don't even have to take office. One day. Well, it's been close to a year, and he's gotten exactly nowhere. And so he's trying to figure out, what do I do here so that people don't see me for who he knows he really is, which is an ignorant clown, a con man. And he's the most skilled. I've gotten a lot of con men sent to prison in my career as a journalist. He's the most skilled con man by far. I've never known anybody in his league as a con artist. So this flip-flop by him, and that's what we used to call them in America, our flip-flops, is indicative of he's flailing around because he doesn't know what to do, but he knows the longer this war goes on, the more people are going to look at him and say, no, you're not the Wizard of Oz. You're the man behind the curtain that the little dog Toto revealed.
Professor, in a further shift away to backing Ukraine again, Trump's Truth Social post was really the main thing that did go viral, regardless of his 52-minute speech. He said that Ukraine was winning the war and they continue to win all of Ukraine back in its original form. He said that Russia is struggling economically. He said that Russia is a paper tiger. He said that the US will continue supplying weapons to NATO as well. So your reaction to this change of tune, Professor, and are people looking at this saying, well, it's about damn time?
Well, the morally right thing here is that Russia should be pushed back out of the territory it's occupied, including Crimea, which it seized through a deceptive move with the, quote, little green men back in 2014. The realistic view of the world is that seems rather unlikely. Ukraine's problem is that without a security guarantee of some kind, a demilitarized zone like we see in Korea, they're vulnerable to future attacks. The Russians immediately responded to Trump's statements, your economy is failing because of this war, by saying, you don't know what you're talking about. In this case, I think he does. It's very clear the Russian economy is in very bad trouble. In addition, though, Putin is stepping up aggressive acts in an effort to provoke some kind of response, hopefully withdrawal from involvement in this by European powers. He's been sending armed drones over Poland, and the Polish have announced anything enters our airspace that's not unauthorized, we're going to shoot it down. I hope you're not a private pilot who gets off course. And other aggressive actions, sending reconnaissance planes and other planes close to NATO planes as aggressive acts. He wants Europe and the U.S. to withdraw their support, in which case very quickly he could overrun Ukraine. And now controlling it after doing that is a whole nother matter, because the Ukrainians do not want to be under the boot of the Kremlin. But all of this goes essentially to, we're in a situation where Putin can't back down. Zelensky needs security guarantees and has to find a way to say, we're going to give up some of our territory, which he totally has spoken against. And the United States flip-flops on positions. So this is a very, very problematic situation, and Trump's incompetence here and the incompetence of people around him is only making this worse.
Well, Professor, you mentioned territory, right? And so one of the things that Trump said in that Truth Social post, he said Ukraine would be able to take back their country in its original form, and who knows, maybe even go further than that. So what we heard from the last few months was that Donald Trump had basically told Zelensky that, look, you might have to concede some land. That's probably the likely case scenario of what you have to give up. He also spoke about a land swap, which makes zero sense given that there's nothing else to swap back. And we thought that this would be the concession that would be the only thing that Zelensky would be able to give in order to get a peace deal over the line. As you mentioned, Zelensky said absolutely not. So I wonder, is Donald Trump now saying that a land swap or concession of land is actually out of the cards and Zelensky won't have to do this?
Well, this is really what we call in America a trial balloon. A president of the United States has an idea, and usually someone who's a surrogate for the president will put out some idea, make sure it gets a lot of news attention to gauge public reaction. And as a con artist, that's one of Donald's very best things. He tries out lines all the time. How does this work? How does this resonate? What kind of kickback do I get to measure what he's going to say? And I wouldn't treat any of this as seriously. This is all the mercurial nature of a man who has no idea what he's doing. And in Zelensky's case, without a security guarantee, why would they agree to anything? They absolutely need a security guarantee because there's a treaty, and treaties don't follow leaders, they follow countries. And under that treaty, the U.S. promised to defend Ukraine if Russia ever invaded it. Doesn't mean we have to send American troops. We can do it the way we've been doing it, by giving them war materiel, which, by the way, is a job creation program in the U.S., just as it is in the U.K. and in Europe. But Donald is just looking desperately for some way to save face so that he doesn't lose some of his less ardent MAGA supporters, and isn't seen as he, I think, should be, given who he is, as an utter fool.
Do you think that that Zelensky will walk away from not just the UN General Assembly, but even just in the next few weeks to a month, with a written agreement from the United States that they will provide security guarantees? Because the thing is that Ukraine is in a difficult position here, where there wasn't a signed agreement in 1994 that the United States would provide protection to Ukraine if Russia were to invade, which they did in 2022, and there hasn't been security protection from the United States. So Zelensky's made it very clear that he needs this in writing.
Because Donald is in such a precarious position in terms of his promises, it's entirely possible that will happen. But frankly, a security guarantee by the U.S. alone would not be, I'm sure, adequate in the minds of Zelensky and his top supporters. He would need to have the UK and the European Union countries, the NATO members, also sign on to such an agreement. And he would need to have more than a piece of paper. He's got to have some kind of a barrier. And there's been some discussion in military circles of setting up something similar to the demilitarized zone. I mean, look, we wouldn't be here but for two previous events. In 2014, Barack Obama concluded he didn't have the support of Congress, and so he did nothing but jawbone about the little green men who invaded Crimea, who you'll recall Putin said, I don't know who those people are. And then after it was over, said, well, of course they were my people. And in the fall of 2021, when the U.S. under the Biden administration released raw intelligence, basic intelligence that the public never normally sees, showing that Russia was amassing troops to invade Ukraine, Biden treated this incrementally. Well, as they step up, we'll step up. Instead, I think he should have drawn a line and said, as of today, we're going to supply unlimited quantities of the very best weaponry we have. And the moment the Russian military sets one foot inside Ukraine, you're going to feel the full power provided by Ukrainians. And they had 6 months to train people. They could have trained F-15 fighter pilots in that period of time. And he didn't. He took a diplomatic approach of, okay, well, you up the ante, now we'll up the ante. You up the ante again, we'll up the ante. And that's a failed policy. It won't work because Putin, as a dictator, unless he loses complete support and is overthrown, has no incentive to back off something he firmly believes. I mean, he believes that Ukraine is properly part of Russia, and it's wrapped up in Russian mythology and religious belief.
David, I want to get into some of the contradictory nature of Donald Trump's words. Now, he was saying that Ukraine has no cards in this war. Just a few months ago, he said that Russia's army is 10 times stronger than Ukraine's. Even at the Alaska summit last month, he told Zelensky that Russia is a very big power. Now he's saying that if Russia was a real military superpower, then it would have taken 1 week to completely take the whole of Ukraine. So I wonder, David, has the US president ever actually known what's going on here on the front lines?
No, and he would have no capacity to interpret and understand it. He would have no historical understanding of it. If someone were to say, for example, on the Russian side, the Ukraine, which was the way the old Soviet referred to it, he would have no appreciation of the significance of putting that article ahead of the word Ukraine. I do think from what we saw at the UN that there are people now getting Donald's ear who are saying, you want to end this war, you've really got to ramp up the pressure on Russia, and you've got to ramp up on the pressure on Europeans for buying Russian fossil fuels. You've got to go after India. Rebuilding the economy it had of 500 years ago is benefiting greatly from buying oil at about a 20% discount from the world price and then selling refined diesel oil to Ukraine. They're profiting in 2 ways. And you got to go after India. You got to make an example of India. So I think that there are some people who have a good idea of what they're doing who are finally beginning to get to Trump. But again, because everything in his mind is full of made up stuff. I have the hottest country in the world. It's really hot, whatever that means. He can just instantly change his narrative. I mean, he's no different than a novelist who's sitting there and goes, oh, no, that scene doesn't work. Delete, retype the scene in a different way.
Professor, it seems that you say it's important to who's been in Donald Trump's ear, and he believes the last person he's spoken to. It seems from my interpretation that he's probably put Steve Witkoff on the back burner and really listening to Keith Kellogg, the general who's come forward, and he's constantly speaking about how Ukraine is winning this fight, how Russia is losing, how Putin is a propagandist, and how he feeds lies to Donald Trump. And it seems as if Trump might be listening to him.
Yeah, well, I have no direct evidence of this that I can report, but knowing Donald very well, yes, somebody, probably General Kellogg, but I would suspect some other people too, are working on moving Trump into another viewpoint. When Donald has an idea in his head, it's almost impossible to get it out of his head. That's why he's promoting tariffs, which he continues to believe China and other countries will pay when they're paid by American consumers. Why he continues to support mercantilism, the dominant economic theory in Europe before Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations and introduced us to market economics. But this change, and unexpected and dramatic change, absolutely suggests that there are people in the administration working on this, and they wouldn't assault him with it. They would not hit him in the face with it. They would just slowly try to maneuver him somewhere. How solid that is, I don't know. Donald's whole life is on a not built on granite. It's not even built on clay. It's a sand that when the tides come in and go out, the sand shifts.
Professor, we saw that Dmitry Peskov, he's obviously pushed back on these comments about being a paper tiger, but how likely do you think it is that Vladimir Putin will jump on the phone with Donald Trump the way he's done before, knowing that Trump is shifting away from him, shifting towards Ukraine, and try and get Trump to do a 180 yet again by charming him, by talking about Russian propaganda, about perhaps that the Russia side is winning, that the United States and Russia can enter some prosperous business opportunities together. I think the concern here is that Putin will force Trump into another 180.
Well, I think there's a very good chance of that. It doesn't have to be Putin. I mean, the Russians are very, very good at manipulating other governments, at manipulating public opinion. We saw that in 2016, where they bought very highly targeted ads to get to a narrow group of voters they thought they might get to shift to voting for Trump and against Hillary Clinton. And the result of the report that Marco Rubio, as a U.S. Senator, signed off on, and the others, was that the Russians were successful in this. Whether or not Donald Trump was merely the beneficiary of it or was directly or indirectly through his campaign helping is the only area of controversy about that. And so you can be sure the Russians in various ways are trying to figure out how to manipulate Trump, and that they will do so with a great deal of skill. And let's not forget that Vladimir Putin is a trained spy master. He was a KGB colonel before the collapse of the Soviet Union. So we're not dealing with somebody who's inherently a diplomat or inherently, as Trump is, a con artist, but somebody who's been trained in exactly these things: how to identify threats, how to, in the background, hopefully with no one seeing the knife, stab people in the back.
Professor, just a few more questions. Marco Rubio, he will meet with Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov today on the sidelines of the ongoing UN General Assembly. Do you think we will see Rubio be all talk on behalf of the Trump administration, or actually live up to these threats of condemning Lavrov and Putin's war?
Marco Rubio wants to keep his job. He will be an absolute perfect Trump loyalist. That is the coin of the realm in Trump's world, is absolute fidelity to whatever the leader wants. So here's Marco Rubio, who has abandoned the principles that he stood for in the U.S. Senate, where he was on the Foreign Relations Committee for years, in order to be Secretary of State, which I think it's pretty clear he hopes will launch him into becoming a future Republican presidential candidate. And given his age, he's got a couple of cycles ahead of him in which he could be a viable candidate. And being fired by Donald Trump would probably, in his mind, not help that one bit. So I expect that the needle he's got to thread is he doesn't want to destroy his credibility with the very experienced UN diplomats, but he's got to focus first and foremost on, how do I show Donald that I am loyal to him above all else?
And we hope that is by being hard on Russia in New York City. But Professor, final question: is the UN General Assembly and Trump's shift towards supporting Ukraine enough of a distraction for the American public when it comes to the Epstein files?
Well, now you've hit upon, not just, there's two items now Trump has to worry about, but absolutely everything you're seeing Donald do right now has as either a primary or secondary motive: how do I get people off the Epstein file? He's got a second problem. Tom Homan, his made-up job of border czar, which did not require Senate confirmation, was videotaped by the FBI accepting a paper bag with $50,000 in it in return for his promise that, well, when the president gets in, I'll have a big job and I'm going to steer contracts to you guys. The White House is now saying there's no such tape. The Democrats are demanding the videotape. And he's got to stop that, because why would you take someone who, if in fact the FBI really does have such a tape, and I'm confident they do, who accepted a $50,000 payment, which, by the way, Homan hasn't denied. He just said what I did wasn't illegal. Why would you appoint someone like that to your regime unless you are a pro-criminal regime? So in everything he does, you have to pay attention that Donald Trump needs to get people off of Epstein. He's not going to succeed at that, and now get people off of the Homan scandal.
David Cay Johnston, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you, Maddie. Anytime.